Hey guys, I'm Jude Thaddean, and this is Storycraft. So today we're starting a series on villains. So when you think villain, you tend to think of this dastardly foe of the protagonist. But if you take that to the extreme, if they are really just a person out to conquer the world, to blow up the world, to get what they want, they're usually not a satisfying villain.
Even a villain with a great plot will end up becoming a parody of a cartoon villain if you're not careful about how you set him up.
Meanwhile, a short distance away, Snidely Whiplash was up to his favorite pastime, tying women to railroad tracks.
Dudley do ride to the Mounties. Get out of that if you can.
To avoid having the villain fall into cartoon villain realm, you need to make sure that the viewer or the reader gets inside the villain's head. And they don't have to agree with the choices that the villain has made or their plot, but they need to be able to be like, oh, well, from the perspective of that character with that worldview, actually, his evil plot actually makes sense. There are exceptions to this rule. Take Exhibit A.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
So Hannibal, obviously, is crazy. He's a psychopath. And we're never going to get in his head in a way that you can go like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Totally, I would do that in his place. No, you wouldn't, because he's crazy. He's Hannibal Lecter. But that is a small subset of storytelling, because you can only really have so many total psychopaths and crazy characters. One of the elements that will help us to basically identify with the villain and be like, hey, you know, that guy kind of has a point. There's this classic trope called the villain speech. And it doesn't have to be a monologue delivered by the villain to a hero, but though that's actually often what it is. Oftentimes, it's like, you know, somebody else talking about the villain, or the hero discovers some letters, or whatever the case may be. They are able to learn about the perspective of the villain, and they go, or at least maybe not them, but at least the reader or the watcher goes, huh. I remember the first time that a villain speech totally subverted the plot for me. I was maybe like 12 or 13 years old watching a movie on, like, I think Turner Classic Movies or one of those old movie stations, and it was Gunga Din. It was a movie based on an old Rudyard Kipling poem. And basically the plot of the story is there are these plucky British officers as the protagonists, and they are trying to stop this guru who's got a thuggy cult that's trying to kill everybody. And so the whole beginning of the movie, you're with the British officers, you believe that they're doing the right thing, but at the end of the movie, we get an amazing villain speech, because what you did, well, at least when I wasn't thinking about it 12 or 13 years old, was that actually the British Empire was a pretty horrible institution in a lot of ways. So you start to get the sense at the end of the movie, as the villain begins to talk to the protagonist, that actually he's doing what he thinks is right, and he sees that his actions as totally moral.
I see it in your faces. Who is this ugly little savage to snarl so boldly at a British lion? Prime generals' friends are not made of jewel swords and mustache wax. They are made of what is there and what is here.
You're mad.
Mad? Mad. Hannibal was mad. Caesar was mad. And Napoleon surely was the maddest of the lot. Ever since time began, they've called mad all the great soldiers in this world. Mad? We shall see what wisdom lies within my madness. For this is but the spring freshet that precedes the flood. From here we roll on, from village to town, from town to mighty city, ever mounting, ever widening, until at last my wave engulfs all India.
When the so-called heroes capture the guru and try to prevent his followers from destroying the British army, The guru actually sacrifices himself, showing that he's selfless, that he is actually as much or more of a hero than the British protagonists.
India is my country and my faith. And I can die for my faith and my country as readily as you for yours. Go, children. India. Farewell.
There's two important elements in a villain speech that make it go from kind of mediocre, lukewarm to amazing. So the first is that the villain can absolutely not be repentant, which is not to say that they can't have some regrets about some of the collateral damage they've done, but ultimately, if they had to do it over again, they would absolutely do it again. The ultimate example of this is John Milton's Paradise Lost. The villain is, of course, Satan. He gets such an amazing write-up by John Milton. The speeches he gives to his demons are so good that many people read this poem and think he's actually the hero, which is an exaggeration. He's obviously doing evil things. But you can totally see his side. And is he repentant? Towards the beginning of the book, he's just lost the battle for heaven, and God has cast him out into hell along with his legions. And is he repentant? No. What he says is, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Great line. And he is not going back. And in fact, you start seeing him launching his campaign to subvert God in other ways. He's going to go after Adam and Eve. He's going to do other things to mess with God's plan. So this lack of repentance is really important. And if you do have a villain who is repentant, well, maybe they're not really a villain at all and more of an antagonist, and they kind of don't play the same role in a story. The second truly important element of a villain speech is their logic. We have to be able to get inside the head of the villain, and they need to be able to explain their plot and their worldview in a way that makes us go, oh. Now, it doesn't have to make us think they're right, because often that doesn't happen. But we have to be able to be like, I can see where they're coming from.
I'm done. I want out.
Kevin Spacey is not happy and he wants out. Why? He's got moral qualms about helping Jeremy Irons unload a whole bunch of toxic debt from his company onto unwilling buyers, and in the process probably helping to sink the world's economy in this movie about the 2008 financial crash. But in classic villain speech fashion, Irons is about to poo-poo Spacey's objections because he thinks that there is a logic behind what has happened, in order to what he sees, and he's about to explain how it all works.
When did you start feeling so sorry for yourself? It's unbearable. What? So you think we might have put a few people out of business today? That's all for naught. But you've been doing that every day for almost 40 years, Sam. And if this is all for naught, then so is everything out there. It's just money. It's made up. Pieces of paper with pictures on it so we don't have to kill each other just to get something to eat. It's not wrong. And it's certainly no different today than it's ever been. 1637, 1797, 1819, 37, 57, 84, 1901, 07, 29, 1937, 1974, 1987, Jesus, didn't that fucker fuck me up good? 92, 97, 2000, and whatever we want to call this. It's all just the same thing over and over. We can't help ourselves. And you and I can't control it or stop it or even slow it, or even ever so slightly alter it. We just react. And we make a lot of money if we get it right. And we get left by the side of the road if we get it wrong. And there have always been, and there always will be, the same percentage of winners and losers, happy fucks and sad sacks, fat cats and starving dogs in this world. Yeah. There may be more of us today than there's ever been, but the percentages, they stay exactly the same.
Let's talk about a movie where the villain speech was attempted. They did it well enough so that the villain was adequate for the plot, but nobody's going to call them the best villain ever, and that is Thanos from the Avengers movies. So let's look at his brief villain speech in I believe this one was Infinity War.
Titan was like most planets. Too many mouths, not enough to go around. And when we faced extinction, I offered a solution.
Genocide.
But random, dispassionate, fair to rich and poor alike. They called me a madman. And what I predicted came to pass.
Congratulations, you're a prophet.
I'm a survivor.
Who wants to murder trillions.
With all 6 stones, I could simply snap my fingers. They would all cease to exist. I call that mercy.
And then what?
I finally rest and watch the sunrise on a grateful universe. The hardest choices require the strongest wills.
Thanos is not repentant. He's a little bit sad, and he's his lines are given well. The acting was good, but nobody's gonna be like, yeah, you totally justified your actions there. He attempted to, but it wasn't really all that convincing.
Once Thanos had collected all the stones, he was essentially a god, and he could have reached into everybody's brain and just said, hey, you should only have 1 or 2 kids instead of 3 or 4, and he would have solved the problem. Or he could have created more planets, more resources. You know, when 30 seconds of thinking undoes the logic of the villain, they probably were not particularly well thought out. But then again, the Avengers wouldn't be needed to stop someone who wanted to create more resources, so you can kind of see why they did it. But that's why Thanos is pretty much a mediocre, adequate villain, not one of the greats.
So if you're ever writing a story and you can't figure out why the villain doesn't work, or you are just watching a movie and trying to figure out why you don't care about the plot so much, it may be that the villain is letting you down. They're failing in the 2 most important elements of the villain speech, whether it's an actual monologue or not. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe. Also, I send out a monthly email where I review the best books I've read that month. There's a lot of fantastic books out there, and both fiction and nonfiction that I review. Consider signing up. You can find a link in the video notes, and I'll put a link in the corner. Thanks. See you guys later.